everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today, I have a good show planned for you guys today, live on today, May the 9th. What is making noise around the NFL? And starting with some of the stories I have planned out for you guys today, we're going to be talking about the NFL strength of schedule, which teams have the hardest schedules coming up, and which teams find themselves on the tougher end of the stick. Then later on the show, we'll go over some of the intricacies of the Green Bay Packers running back room and what that is shaping out to look like in 2024, as well as looking at the city of St. Louis, Missouri, how they are looking primed to have another NFL team potentially call St. Louis home. I'll tell you more details on that later on in the show. That is all coming up on today's episode, so make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And without further ado, I mentioned the strength of schedule around the NFL. The NFL will officially release their schedule in about 6 days from now, Wednesday, May the 15th. However, we do know the opponents and the strength of schedule. We don't know which order they'll be played in, who will play who on which day, what week of the NFL season, but you can at least paint a picture of how hard this road to the playoffs, this road to a potential Super Bowl for some of these teams could be, no matter how it all pans out to be in which order. Looking at it, looking up some of the numbers behind everything, the biggest consensus I got was the AFC North, one of the toughest divisions already in itself. Talking about the Browns, the Bengals, the Ravens, and the Steelers. The Browns, the Ravens, and the Steelers all have the three toughest schedules in the entire NFL, whereas the Bengals come in as the 16th hardest schedule in the NFL. So a big discrepancy there. So I'll start off with the Browns looking at their schedule. They have the hardest schedule in the NFL. They have an opponent combined win percentage of 55%, I want to say, or over that 50 mark of their record. So all of their opponents combined, based on last year's records, have at least better than a 500 record in 2023. So that already is painting a tougher picture for the Cleveland Browns. They are trying to make it back to the playoffs for a second consecutive time here. The only time they ever did that in back-to-back years was in 1989. And this entire schedule, looking at their opponents, it includes 12 games versus teams with a winning record, going back to the opponent combined win percentage. That's tied for the most in the NFL. No other team plays more than 12 games against teams that had an above 500 record. So that's something to keep an eye out as well. And also, they're going to be facing 5 out of the 8 teams that made the playoffs last year as well. Talking about the Steelers, the Ravens in their division, the Chiefs, the Dolphins, and the Dallas Cowboys will all be on the Cleveland Browns schedule. And that's just fascinating to look at, depending on the home and away games with the Chiefs, the Dolphins, and the Ravens, how it all pans out. Overall, it's the hardest schedule on paper on how people judge the combined win percentages and their opponents. You usually expect those teams that I mentioned to continue on their path to being relevant and being consistently good. So the Cleveland Browns have definitely a tougher road to prosperity than others, but they have the team to do it. How Deshaun Watson kind of combats all of that, trying to make himself fit back into this team, will be something to watch out for. But Cleveland has the hardest schedule on paper. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints with the tied easiest schedule on paper. Their combined opponent win percentage is only 45%, just under that 500 mark. But those two have the easiest schedules on paper. They're the only two teams that have their opponent win percentage under 4.65 or under .465. And with that division, looking at it, the whole NFC South, it's not entirely too outing this all. All of the AFC South is pretty much in the top 5 easiest schedules on paper. I don't know in which order. Actually, I do know the order. You have the Falcons, the Saints, the Bucks and the Panthers all in the top 5 easiest schedules in the NFL. The Bucks have the 5th easiest, the Panthers have the 4th easiest, and the Saints and the Falcons are tied for first with the easiest schedule on paper. Again, that division wasn't very good. The Panthers had the season that they had with Bryce Young. Then you look at someone like the Bucks, who made the playoffs, but also trying to keep it all relatively similar in that division. You can't give the Bucks just one of the hardest ones just because they played very well last year. That all sort of plays into this equation that makes up who you're playing in the NFL regular season. So the Bucks kind of got a bit fortunate there to be in the top 5 easiest schedules to continue on the success that they had from last year. And then the Saints and the Falcons coming off of a pretty disappointing season. Based on their quarterback play, you'd expect that to be tremendously better. So they could also be another team that benefits of an easier schedule to make a playoff push there. And the Saints as well, they were all right. They were good in some games, pretty poor in other games. You don't really know what to expect with this roster makeup and how they handle their salary cap, but they do have the benefit of the doubt with an easier schedule. Going back up to the top, though, to the harder teams, the Baltimore Ravens have the 2nd hardest schedule in the NFL. They're just under the combined win percentage of the Cleveland Browns. Theirs is .536. They're the only team, them and the Cleveland Browns, who have an opponent win percentage above that .535 mark, like I mentioned before. And their road games are what makes this even more challenging for the Baltimore Ravens. They're going to face a flurry of teams on the road that are probably some of the best in the NFL. The Steelers, I won't say that they're the best, but in that division, you know what I'm trying to say. The Bengals are on the road, the Chiefs on the road, the Texans on the road, and the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers all had winning records in 2023, and the Ravens will have to all travel to all of these teams at some point in 2024. So that, again, paints a tougher picture with bringing in Derrick Henry, how the wide receiver room shapes out, how does Lamar play off of another great season, getting to the AFC Championship game, how do they rebound now with this, and just some other nuggets around the NFL schedule and the strength of schedule. Looking at a team like the Chicago Bears, I thought it was interesting to point out that all of their team has pretty much been shaken up, and they're pretty much introducing a whole new group of players. Keenan Allen, DeAndre Swift, Rome Odunze, Caleb Williams, obviously, DJ Moore, all these guys that now really flip this offense on its head. They have the easiest schedule among the teams that finished last in their division. They have the 29th hardest or the 4th easiest schedule, whichever way you want to look at it, in the NFL. So that's something to keep an eye on as well, because for a younger team trying to fit all these pieces in together, a rookie quarterback, to have an easy schedule is very fortunate for them, and it'll give them some confidence, some good momentum. Even if this season doesn't pan out the way they want to, I'm pretty confident that they could do some great things with the 29th hardest schedule in the NFL, and that will set a good foundation going forward for this long-term project that they're trying to build. And another thing to look at, I mentioned the Cincinnati Bengals have the 16th hardest schedule in the NFL, while the rest of the teams in their division in the AFC South have the top 3 hardest. Them trying to rebound off of Joe Burrow getting injured and coming off of a 9-8 season. Having that sort of easy schedule for them, look to them to maybe have one of the best records in the AFC. I know that's maybe a bold thing to say now in just the beginning of May, but I think that plays a big part in it because they have the talent level that they have, and the rest of the teams in their division have to face a harder schedule. I think they've got a big break here with the way that their opponents have been laid out, so keep an eye out on them for the rest of that season and how it pans out. And also looking at another team, Jim Harbaugh, the Los Angeles Chargers, they have the easiest schedule in the AFC. So again, similarly to the Chicago Bears, a team that's trying to get their legs up under them, trying to establish some sort of identity, president, style, culture in the NFL with this new management coming in. I think that's a big benefit for them. I still wouldn't say they have a winning record just because there's a lot of unknown factors, but I can see a lot of positives coming off of them having such an easier schedule compared to everybody in the AFC. That could certainly benefit them to continue on this long-term project. I have all the confidence in the world in Jim Harbaugh. How this all pans out, injuries and other uncontrollable factors, we'll just have to see how it does finally lay out come December, January, but that's something also to keep in mind when you're looking at the Chargers' final record at the end of the regular season. But that's pretty much all from the strength of schedule. Again, I'll remind everyone that the official scheduled release will be on May the 15th in less than a week's time now, so keep an eye out on that. But in the meantime now, we will move on with the rest of the show. We're going to take a quick break right now, and on the other side of that, we're going to talk about Netflix and the NFL partnership that I think is starting to gain some traction here. I'll give you guys more details on that, as well as talking about the Tyler Boyd signing with the Tennessee Titans, giving a big overview of the AFC South and how all those teams stack up against each other. All of that is coming up in just a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Keeping it rolling here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Before I jump into the next segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make at any point during this live show, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen. GSMCpodcast.net enables me to see your question pop up on my screen. I can read it on air, and I can get your guys' perspective or how you guys feel on any topic that I'm talking about or just on the segment in general. It's a massive help for this show, and we greatly appreciate it anytime you guys are able to use that link, which again is GSMCpodcast.net. But continuing on with what we were talking about, the NFL potentially having some games on Netflix. This whole thing is really starting to make a lot of sense to me. It's starting to fall into place the more and more these live events happen on Netflix, and the more and more NFL personalities, former athletes start appearing on Netflix. Of course, if you weren't aware now, the whole topic issue that this all revolves around is that the NFL is set to play games on Christmas Day this year. Two of them actually falling on a Wednesday this year, and that raised some eyebrows, but the NFL is going through with it. How it all pans out, where the games are going to be streamed, and where people can just tune in to watch these games on Christmas Day. That's a big part about it, and the idea right now is that the NFL is looking to get around $50 million to $100 million for the broadcasting rights to each of the two games this year, and where Netflix comes into it now, I mentioned Boomer Esiason, former host, member of the CBS Today group there on Sundays leading up into the games at 1 o'clock. He made an appearance on WFAN, the radio station, and brought up the idea of Netflix sort of sliding in here now with these Christmas Day games being a hot topic. Who's going to broadcast them, where people can go and watch them. He is really the first person that brought up this idea of live games from the NFL coming to Netflix. And specifically, he said, do not be surprised if the NFL and Netflix get in bed for a nice little Christmas Day football games. I would not be surprised. And it makes sense when Boomer Esiason says something like this. It's kind of been in the back of my mind with Netflix doing a lot of these sort of events, live events that include sports, former athletes, and just things revolved around the game of football specifically. They have other soccer things on there. You have the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson fight being streamed live on Netflix. The Tom Brady roast that happened about a week ago now. It was a massive hit. I thought it was great. A lot of people are raving about it with all the comedians on there, obviously drawing in a lot of attention, but also former athletes there that you go on the greatest roast of all time to watch on Netflix. You don't really know what this is going to be. It's a live event, so you tune in and you look at Tom Brady, you look at all these football guys, and you might not know a lot about them, but you see some other comedians there, some other personalities in the audience, and it just draws more attention to this. Once you hear the jokes, once you see the people being introduced or being made fun of at the roast, you sort of, get a good vibe off of it just because it makes you laugh. They might tell a great joke that you really liked, and then it sort of triggers you to go out and find out more about them. You're interested now more in them, and then it leads into more getting involved in the sport. If they're former athletes, you look at the current athletes, and you know how it all goes, that sort of process. I think the NFL really hit a home run here with this greatest roast of all time with Tom Brady, introducing the world of football now more into Netflix. They also had the quarterback series on there. They're coming out with a wide receiver series this summer as well. So all of that is making sense in how this all falls in line with NFL being more involved with the live events. You also have, outside of just your typical sports, the WWE is also going to be streaming Monday Night Raw exclusively from Netflix starting in 2025, and then having all their other big name shows follow off of that. Everything is shifting over to these streaming platforms. Amazon Prime has games now. Peacock has exclusive rights to a playoff game. More and more, it's starting to shift into this realm, and I think Netflix isn't dumb by any means to just use layman's terms. They know what this landscape is starting to pan out to be. The NFL certainly knows how to keep up with trends and have games on Christmas, sort of like the NBA has been doing. They also are now starting to hop on that trend and have games on Christmas Day to attract that audience that might not have been involved with the NFL during this time of year. Now, Netflix seems very intriguing as of now, and I think there's definitely some factual idea behind this Netflix and NFL partnership, just because there is an awkward spot here. I mentioned before with the games being on a Wednesday. You usually have CBS, Fox on Sundays. On Saturdays, it might be the NFL Network. And really, where the games have been shown for these holiday games, the Christmas Day games, they're usually on the NFL Network. At least one of the games are. Usually the Christmas Eve games, the Christmas Day games, they're usually on the NFL Network. A couple of them are. But if you guys weren't aware also, the NFL Network really got into this situation where they're starting to release some of their main talent on some of their programs. Michael Irvin was let go. NFL Total Access is starting to slow down. It might be shut down. I want to say Good Morning Football as well is also in a weird spot right now with their talent and continuing on with their show. And the NFL Network right now as a whole is in a weird spot where there's a lot of gray area. I mentioned on a YouTube short or just on this live video that ESPN and NFL Media, the NFL Network, are close to agreeing on a deal to kind of merge together. So where these games now go to be streamed, these Thanksgiving Day games, these Christmas Eve, Christmas Day games go to be streamed, there is an opening there for Netflix, for another one of these companies to slide in there and get the broadcasting rights to these games. And it seems too perfect, too obvious now to not happen. With how successful Netflix is becoming with these live events, I think it would be a missed opportunity if the NFL and Netflix don't agree on something like this. It might be a bit fast for a lot of people to just absorb all these new platforms that they have to get accustomed to and learn about to go watch their favorite team. But I think riding this wave out and how much momentum it's getting now, I think it's too obvious for the NFL not to take advantage of it. And of course, they hold the leverage a lot because of the product that they're trying to put out there. Obviously, people want to have these games, want to have all eyes on their platform. So the NFL has some leverage there. And I think also, in saying that, with the NFL having this leverage, I think Netflix also will have to not cater to the NFL and what they're asking for, but I think both of them will find a common ground, and it just is too obvious and only a matter of time for not only this to happen with the Christmas games. I think it's only a matter of time before a lot of these games are being brought over to Netflix, more on Amazon Prime, I'm sure, more on Peacock. And I think the holiday games, the holiday day games, are a good intro to ease it into some of the lives of some of these people that might not be fans of it, pulling them away from their traditional cable TV. People are going to not like the change or going to be confused by it and how to watch their favorite teams, like I mentioned. But I think introducing it in this way, just with, all right, we're just going to do it once a year for the next 2 to 3 years, however they want to settle it, to only stream it on Netflix for Christmas and Thanksgiving, and then people get accustomed to it, and then you could explore streaming some other games there more and more. Also, not only for the NFL, but also this opens the door for other sports. It sets the precedent for maybe some NBA games coming over to Netflix, and also just opening that door a little bit. Maybe the MLB also. I know they have a partnership, or at least the MLS does as well, with Apple TV, another streaming platform. I don't see why Netflix wouldn't want to try and get a piece of the cake, so to say, there, with NBA games or MLB games there. There's a lot of intricacies that I'm not really going into, but that is just a realm where if the NFL starts to do it, I think more of these other big sports will also try to explore that possibility of getting their content on these platforms as well. And I would expect more news around the broadcasting rights and more on this story when the NFL releases its official schedule next week on Wednesday, May the 15th. I expect more to sort of be brought up about this. If they announce the schedule, they usually, I'm pretty sure they announce where the games will be on. CBS, Fox, or anything like that, NBC, Sunday Night Football, stuff like that. They usually announce that as well with the schedule, I'm pretty sure. So if you go to the Christmas Day games and you see who's playing on there and maybe it's unknown or to be determined or something like that, I think that's a good sign to show that maybe they're considering this avenue, but we're going to have to wait until next week. But I just wanted to bring that up now because Netflix is really riding a big wave right now, a high off of the roast and off of these other live events. And especially with this new generation, just to mention this before I go into the next segment, a lot of the younger generation goes to these streaming platforms already. They're more accustomed to it, and it's a good way to get to the younger generation quicker rather than cable TV, them not being really interested in that. Everyone's on their phone, everyone's looking at streaming and social media and things like that. I think this is a great way to just go straight to the younger generation and get them involved earlier on in these sports and in these big companies' products. Just an idea to throw out there, just something to give you guys thought on this whole topic. But let me know what you guys think, if this is a good idea. Do you hate it? Do you love it? Please leave it in the comments or in the live chat box on this show. But in the meantime, we will move on with the rest of this episode. After the break, we're going to talk about more, like I mentioned, on Tyler Boyd and his arrival to the AFC South, as well as touching on St. Louis being a potential home for an NFL team, why I believe that could be a real possibility, as well as the Green Bay Packers' new running back room and how good, how much better it makes them in 2024. All of that is coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back on to continue on with more segments on today's episode. Now shifting over our attention to the AFC South. The biggest addition so far, or I should say recently, has been Tyler Boyd agreeing to that 1 year, $4.5 million deal to join his former offensive coordinator, Brian Callahan, as the new addition to this wide receiver room in Tennessee. It's a short-term deal, so after this season, I'm sure they're going to reevaluate it and see where they're at, how productive it has been, and how well this entire group, how well this entire team performs. I think is starting to shift over more towards the offense and be more offensive based, whereas before with Mike Vrabel, I think he really tried to build up a low scoring, very solid defense. Front line was great, back end was very reliable. Now I think with Brian Callahan, you're starting to see a shift more with a modernized view of offenses, of his whole team. And just looking at their wide receiver room that they have, it reminds you a lot of what he did do over in Cincinnati with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd. Now he's sort of bringing that idea over to Tennessee with Calvin Ridley, signing him in free agency. You have DeAndre Hopkins already there. Now you bring in Tyler Boyd as well. That's a very reliable and a very just consistent big three, if you would, at the wide receiver position to really base your success off of. It's great for a young quarterback like Will Levis trying to now maneuver his way around a new playbook, a new head coach, essentially starting over again from his rookie season with Mike Vrabel, now starting that process over again with Brian Callahan. It does help that he has all these weapons now. I mentioned Tony Pollard as well, also being brought in here to complement that offense. That's a great way to ease this new change into a young quarterback to just keep him on his trajectory of development. And what I wanted to do really was looking at this AFC, talking about the Titans, and just looking through all these teams. The AFC South has been one of the divisions that has improved a lot or just has changed a lot. Maybe not improved if you want to base it off of the results in 2024, but there's certainly been a lot of movement and a lot of change. Other divisions like the NFC North, even the NFC East as well, with the Commanders, the Giants, and the Eagles really shifting a lot of things. The AFC South has been, in my opinion, right there with the best of them, and I just wanted to go over some of the changes that these teams have made and how it stacks up against all these other teams in that division, starting with probably the most obvious one, the one most people would put at the top of their list, their rankings, as I would. Honestly, the Houston Texans. Talk about change with the Texans coming off of the year that they did last year, how well they played, how much they surprised a lot of people. This year now, in this free agent period, they go out, they lose Jonathan Grenard, and they bring in an immediate replacement in him with Danielle Hunter. They need an improvement at running back, so they trade for Joe Mixon. They trade for Stephon Diggs, which shocked the whole NFL landscape, to add to a Nico Collins and a Tank Dell, who already were great on their own. Now they have that veteran presence in there, not to mention Dalton Schultz, as well as a reliable weapon for C.J. Stroud. Then on the defensive side of the ball, also you add Azeez Al-Shaair with all the young, prosperous talent you already had on that side of the ball. DeMeco Ryans, I think a lot of people forget, is a defensive guy. The offense looks very promising, very exciting, but really he excels on the defensive side of the ball, bringing in Daniil Hunter, like I mentioned, adding him to a Derek Stingley, Jalen Petrie, Christian Harris, Will Anderson, all these young, exciting players. Now you bring in Daniil Hunter, a more experienced and established guy. It's a good mixture of youth and experience there. I still have the Texans really leading this group, but the rest of the teams in the AFC South don't fall far behind. I mentioned the Titans, so I'll go to them next. I already explained Tyler Boyd, Calvin Ridley coming into Hopkins to complement DeAndre Hopkins and Will Levis. But they also drafted J.C. Latham with the 7th pick in the NFL draft. That's something that they needed there to solidify as much as they can that offensive line. They also added Lloyd Cushenberry to be their center. And on the defensive side of the ball, also they're not forgetting to address it. Chidobe Awuzie came in free agency. L'Jarius Sneed signed that massive deal with the Titans as well. You already had Jeffrey Simmons there anchoring that middle of your defensive line. So the Titans also aren't falling too far behind. They still have questions about pass rush. Apart from Jeffrey Simmons, what else can you consistently depend on throughout 17 weeks in an NFL season? A good pass rush complements a really good coverage on the back end and vice versa. They seem to have addressed a lot of the secondary, but I don't care how good your corners are. You need a good pass rush there to really make the whole thing look dominant, look very successful if you want to have a good season. There are some questions there for me. I mentioned Will Levis. How does he develop in year 2 under a new head coach and things like that? And also, talking about development, how does Brian Callahan develop in this new opportunity of being a head coach? That's something to look out for as well, how that sort of transition goes. And continuing on with the rest of the teams, the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, another team that might not have made a big blockbuster move, but I like the pieces that they also added, drafting Brian Thomas out of LSU, Darnell Savage to the defensive side of the ball, Eric Armstead, Gabe Davis, Ezra Cleveland, and Mitch Morse on the offensive line. Those are the biggest additions that they made to this team, and defensively they were young. I think that was a big part of their problem. A lot of youth and not a lot of just knowing what you're going to get out of this guy. A lot of the players on the defensive side of the ball were still trying to find their way. Other than Josh Allen, who had a great year, you had Trayvon Walker there. Again, younger player. You think he's going to be great. You picked him first overall, but he's still trying to find his way, not really having a breakout year. You bring in guys to complement that. Eric Armstead is going to be massive for them. Darnell Savage on the back end. I still have questions about their corners, the defensive back help depth that they have at that spot, but I think the defensive line will help a lot to try and stop the run and get to the quarterback. I think that's a good foundation to build off of. And on the offensive side of the ball, you bring in Brian Thomas. You lose Calvin Ridley to a division opponent, which is crazy, but you bring in Brian Thomas. And I was really high on Brian Thomas just because I think, and this is just my opinion, at LSU, with Jaden Daniels getting a lot of the attention and Malik Neighbors as well, rightly so, I think Brian Thomas was very talented in his own part, in his own role that he had in the offense. He was just a little bit overshadowed, I would say, by these two other superstars, but I think that's a great addition to the Jaguars as well. And a lot of people forget that to start the season, they had one of the best starts. They were the number 1 seed at one point, and they showed their youth, they showed their inexperience down the line. Of course, they got hurt, and they sort of got away from the running game a little bit because of injuries, but they deteriorated down the line there in the regular season, and they missed the playoffs completely, but that glimpse of promise and upside that they showed, I like what they're doing there, especially under Doug Peterson. It'll be a lot closer between them and the Titans, I think, than anybody else with the Texans, but that just makes it more exciting. And then just to cap it off here, the Indianapolis Colts, if I were to rank them, they do fall last for me, but they're not a bad team, really, when you look at them, the kind of players that they have. They drafted Laiatu Latu at number 15. They also drafted A.D. Mitchell in the second round to add to that skill-based position group that they have going there. The biggest question around the Colts really is just Anthony Richardson and how he looks health-wise. He missed a massive chunk of the year last year, but in those couple games that he got, it showed a lot of excitement and just good signs that you want in a quarterback. Very mobile, very big, almost Cam Newton-esque with the size and the arm talent that he has. They have something really exciting there for the Colts, but just that uncertainty of not having that full year under your belt. I think we could see some hiccups. We could see some learning curves this year, especially with how young they are on the defensive side of the ball as well. It really isn't a recipe for success in this day and age in the NFL. So they have great talent. They have a lot of good players. They were able to bring back Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon and Zaire Franklin on the defensive side of the ball as well. So for me, it's just a matter of time with the Colts. They will get there. I expect them to be more competitive down the line. But for right now, it feels like just a season to understand what players you can depend upon, what players are your superstars that you really want to build around going forward. And then maybe next year or the year after that, we could start looking at them in the same light as the Houston Texans from this year maybe or a year ago. They're right there, but, for right now, I would have them ranked last. But the AFC South, man, as a whole, is really starting to look exciting with a lot of these changes and all these young players coming in. It's going to be a tighter division, I think, than a lot of people would give the other teams credit for, just because the Texans have a very hard schedule. They have the fifth or fourth hardest schedule in the NFL. I was talking about it a little bit before. So trying to absorb that after a season of success and now people game planning for you, it could have them see a few slip-ups, and then the Titans or the Jaguars can slip right in there and take advantage of some of these hiccups. So it could be a lot closer than people think. I'm excited to watch it. I'm definitely going to be tuning into some of those games. But in the meantime, we will move on with the rest of the show. After a quick break, we're going to talk about the Green Bay running back room there in Wisconsin, how the additions of Josh Jacobs and a rookie could really be the game changer for this Green Bay Packers team, as well as talking more on the St. Louis Battlehawks and their UFL team, how that could set a foundation to them absorbing maybe an NFL team down the line. Learn more about those topics in just a few seconds. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Moving right along with today's show, moving now onto the state of Wisconsin in Green Bay, where we look at this Green Bay Packers team. The biggest change, the biggest shift that surprised a lot of people, I think, and definitely surprised me, was the shift that they had at the running back position. Obviously, last year with Aaron Jones and how really he finished off the playoff run that they had going there against the Cowboys, eliminating them and having a massive game on that day. Then you continue it on with the San Francisco 49ers and how you were right there at the doorstep of upsetting the number one seed in the NFC. But you fell a little bit short, but I don't think it was for a reason of the running backs and Aaron Jones specifically. Then you head into free agency this year. Definitely surprised me by bringing in Josh Jacobs. Then with that, you kind of wonder where Aaron Jones is at, and he then is released, and he signs with none other than the Minnesota Vikings. So those games are going to be even more entertaining than they are already. But with this new running back room now, with two fresh faces in there other than A.J. Dillon, who was able to come back, this Green Bay team is looking at a new running back room that just poses the question to me, how much better, I guess you could be, with these new running backs. You hope to be better by bringing in Josh Jacobs, who had one of the better seasons a couple of years ago. Last year, he was hindered with injury, but in 2022, he led the NFL in rushing, so he's expected to take the majority of the reps there as the guy for the Green Bay Packers. And according to their offensive coordinator, Adam Stenovich, he said that's good in all situations, referencing Josh Jacobs, mentioning how he's just good all over. He can block, he can catch passes out of the backfield, and obviously run the rock as well as anybody when he's healthy, as a point of emphasis. So saying that and emphasizing Josh Jacobs' health, now you move on to A.J. Dillon, bringing him back, being a different sort of runner than Josh Jacobs, just being more of a bruiser, short yardage situation kind of back. You know, every team has that running back that is just tough as hell, can really just do everything and get you those yards. But then also you look, not many people pay attention to the rookie that they drafted out of USC, Marshawn Lloyd, and bringing him in, it just goes over people's heads, really. You drafted running back in the later rounds, and not too much is expected of him, being a rookie, and you have two pros there already at the position. Most teams run that 1-2 punch that everyone is starting to jump on the trend of. The Steelers, the Cowboys, to some extent a little bit. At least that's what they've said. The Ravens have done it with a couple of running backs. The Commanders now with Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson. It is starting to become more popular, but it is interesting with the Packers having all three of these guys because Stenovich praised Marshawn Lloyd, the rookie that they drafted at a USC, because of his speed and vision. And more specifically, he described Marshawn Lloyd by saying, "I would like to get Lloyd out there as much as possible. He's got a skill set that's a little bit different than AJ's as far as speed. He's not quite the bruiser that Dillon is, obviously, but he's got a different type of skill set." And he also added that just Marshawn Lloyd brings that explosive sort of element to their offense. And we saw last season how A.J. Dillon got 178 touches, a lot of them when Aaron Jones went down with that injury. And now with Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd there, how will this all look? How will the reps be divided? How will the carries? Who will be in on third down? Who will be in there on first and second down? All these sort of things, plus trying to manage the injury bug as well. How does this shape up for the Green Bay Packers? How good can they be? Well, I think just looking at this and how this team is sort of trying to build this new identity on offense. Last year, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon had 320 rushing attempts for the Packers last season. Plus, you look at all their other young wide receivers as well, totals to about 7 skill position players that are available to Jordan Love. So that was one of their greatest virtue for the Packers, the young players that are breaking through and are playing very well to a lot of people's surprise. Now, in year 2 or year 3 for a lot of these guys, how do they build on that? And how do they change and try to integrate a guy like Marshawn Lloyd? Well, I think it's important for Jordan Love, really, which is the center point of this whole operation, kind of struck gold there with Jordan Love really panning out last year and how mature he looked in those playoff games. You obviously want to build this whole thing around Jordan Love, and you don't want to overdo it with getting him all these pass catchers and just throwing yourself out of these games, overdoing it with the passing game. You have guys like Jalen Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavion Wicks, Christian Watson, all young, exciting receivers that you want to get the ball to. But I think running the ball is just as much of an emphasis for Matt LaFleur, coming from the Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay tree. They have so many coaches there that I'm starting to lose track of who actually was part of that tree and that coaching sort of cycle. But Matt LaFleur comes from that system with Kyle Shanahan. Running the ball is just as important as throwing it to all these world-class, exciting young wide receivers. And that's something I think the Green Bay Packers are trying to really emphasize here now. Having a great running back group, a room will really set the precedent to opening up the field and getting it to these guys. The Jalen Reeds, Romeo Dobbs, Dontavion Wicks, Christian Watson, all sort of look similar. Really mostly Jaden Reed and Romeo Dobbs. Dontavion Wicks is a bit longer, a bit lengthier, sort of like Christian Watson, but also they play very differently. I think they have a lot of variability on this team to get and keep really defenses on their toes, trying to get them to all these different playmakers. And it'll just open up the field if you can, one, hand it to Josh Jacobs or A.J. Dillon on early downs. Then maybe Marshawn Lloyd comes in there and just changes the whole dynamic of the style that the defense is accustomed to, sort of like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs in Detroit. David Montgomery is a punisher, runs between the tackles most often, gets you those short yardage situations. Then Jahmyr Gibbs comes in, he runs it to the outsides, he catches passes out of the backfield and just has blazing speed and elusiveness. I think the Packers are trying to take that note a little bit out of the Detroit Lions playbook and are trying to integrate it here. I'm a big fan of it. Now, how it actually all plays out, that's a different story with injuries and stuff like that, and just how teams are just more accustomed to the Packers now. They won't be as surprised by Jordan Love or some of these playmakers that they have. How they adjust to that will be a big reason as to how successful they are or how maybe lackluster this season could be for them. But I have confidence in them. Touching lastly on Josh Jacobs again, with bringing him in and signing that massive 4-year, $48 million deal for running backs, I think this really benefits him more than anybody on this offensive side of the ball, more than Jordan Love to some extent, because bringing him in, signing him for that amount of money, you obviously have some confidence in him to be the guy and tailor a lot of these carries in these games. By bringing him in, having A.J. Dillon there, having Marshawn Lloyd, you don't have to give him over 25 carries per game and just really run him into the dirt and just be running on fumes in week 16, in week 17, where you're supposed to be, oddly enough, feeling your best, playing your best football, and really having the most energy. This benefits nobody more than Josh Jacobs to try and get the best out of him and absorb the most talent and potential you can out of Josh Jacobs, giving him some rest, throwing A.J. Dillon out there, Marshawn Lloyd out there as well. You can still have a great running back for the amount of money that they paid by giving him some rest and not giving him over 20 carries per year. I mentioned before that's the idea that these NFL teams are sort of rocking with now, and the Packers are really going above and beyond and having 3 guys that they want to get involved. And I'm interested to see how it looks, how this all plays out for the Packers, because again, I'm pretty high on the Green Bay Packers. I think last year they really impressed me, mostly on the defensive side of the ball, but offensively, adding all these talents to their offense, to Jordan Love, and how Matt LaFleur uses them. I think he's going to go to town on all the different ways he could use these guys, use their skill sets. They're going to be a team to watch out for. And I don't think, I'll leave you guys with this thought, I don't think it's too crazy to say in terms of quality, or actually in terms of quantity of skill-based players that they have on offense, they're right there with the San Francisco 49ers, who everybody thinks is the best team unquestionably in the NFC. In terms of the amount of guys you have on offense that you can get the ball to, they're right there with them. Now, how they compare in terms of quality, that has to be played out in the season and just stuff like that, but just the amount of guys that they have, they're right there with the 49ers, which is why I'm so high on them. But I'll leave you guys with that thought, and I will go into the last break of the show. And on the other side, we'll talk about a little bit briefly about the St. Louis campaign to try and get an NFL team there. There is a lot of buzz around football there, just not in the NFL. I'll talk more about it in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere. back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast for the last segment I wanted to cover. This time, not so much technically on NFL and an NFL team specifically, but the city of St. Louis, Missouri there hasn't had an NFL team there since 2015, lastly by the Los Angeles Rams, and they spent that time there from 1995 to 2016 before moving to Los Angeles and St. Louis securing a $790 million settlement from the Rams moving back to Los Angeles, and now they're really just known as a UFL team. They have the St. Louis Battlehawks there to give them some sort of taste of football in the city. And recently, in 3 out of their 3 home games for the Battlehawks, they brought in over 30,000 fans there. And other cities don't just simply attract the amount of attention that the Battlehawks do in these games. Other cities have struggled to attract similar numbers. I forget which one is the next closest to 30,000, but there is a pretty big discrepancy there in how much St. Louis Battlehawk fans, football fans, tune into their home games compared to other teams around the UFL. And Mike Mitchell of Sports Illustrated reported that, ironically, funny enough how this all just compares in St. Louis, that 32,969 people attended last Saturday's Battlehawks home game against Houston, while there was a whopping 38,559 people attending the St. Louis Cardinals game on Saturday as well. So what am I talking about? You're talking about a UFL team, not really a massive eye-popping, professional sports league, bringing in similar numbers to a Major League Baseball team in the city of St. Louis. Yeah, the MLB game had more people there, but I'm sure when people think about the UFL and MLB and how many fans go to these games, I doubt a lot of people will see or give an answer that is this close in numbers and capacity at these games. And it just brings up the idea of, so many people like football in St. Louis. Why not explore the idea of bringing back a team there to the NFL? Clearly the fans and the people are itching to get back to seeing an NFL team there. I know the Rams really didn't have the greatest of success there in their time period, the 20 years they spent in St. Louis and having that franchise there. But I think it's slowly starting to build up on something that could be of interest to the NFL to have a team there. And it's not too crazy to think about when I know probably it isn't realistic, but it isn't impossible to look at a team maybe like the Chiefs, who are in a bit of a bind right now with Arrowhead and riding out their lease in 2030. They're trying to get a new stadium or at least renovations to Arrowhead at worst. But they are looking at other potential home fields to try and move to. Why not stay in the same state? It would cause a lot of just hurdles you have to jump over to actually accomplish this. How does the fan base feel? Because St. Louis and Kansas City are pretty far from each other in the state of Missouri. So how do you deal with that sort of backlash with one of the, if not the most famous team right now in the NFL? That one's sort of a pipe dream, sort of, you don't expect it to happen, but it does have the options of happening. Then you look at a team also like the Cleveland Browns too. They're also looking to upgrade their stadium, and it was reported that they want taxpayers to provide at least half of the funding for a new stadium, for a new $2.4 billion dome stadium. If they were able to get a new, brand new stadium. If not, they would just settle for a $1 million renovation to their current stadium in Cleveland, but their preference is going after the new stadium there in Cleveland. Everybody wants a dome now. So how that all shakes itself out with the taxpayers there and funding that sort of project there, massive project, I think also isn't something you can close the door to. The Chicago Bears also announced their plans for a new stadium. You have the Los Angeles Chargers as well cooking up something in Los Angeles as well, trying to build their own facility there. And not to mention also the Washington Commanders won't be far either from trying to at least upgrade FedEx Field or just getting the heck out of there and going to a new stadium. So there are options there if the NFL really wants to dig their feet into the ground and explore this idea of bringing maybe one of these teams, a different team, over to St. Louis. But it is far from happening right now, but I think there are options there for the NFL, for St. Louis to make a pretty decent case for why they are an adequate city to have an NFL franchise there, why they're really itching to get another team back in that city. Other than the Cardinals, there's not too much attention there going to sports, at least prosperous, successful sports, where I'm not saying you bring a team there and instantly they're going to be successful in drawing a lot of people, but for now, there is starting to be a small fire there, some smoke starting to build up there, and it is interesting to think about with the fan atmosphere seeming to be so great and just excited about going to these UFL games and just seeing some resemblance of football. I think that's exciting to think about, something to potentially build on and do more research on if you're trying to bring a team over there for an NFL franchise to call St. Louis home. And also, if you actually do go through with this whole project, how will the fans love and just attendance to all these games change if they, struggle with the team being there, if the team's not performing well, or there's a lot of extracurricular stuff that's going on there. If you do bring a new team to St. Louis, how do the fans sort of fall out of love with it? How do they stick it out and really show their resilience to being fans, being supportive fans? How does that change if you actually go through with this? All of those are variables to think about on how this could all shape out for the NFL, maybe bringing over a team for the St. Louis Rams. But it is in its early stages, in its very infant stages right now for St. Louis. I'm sure if you ask a lot of people there that they would love to have it back, but you have to go through a lot of financial and legal things that, quite honestly, I'm not adequate enough to talk about it on here with all the details, but that is something that's sort of starting to make noise with the UFL. And I think that's one thing the UFL does well to wrap up this segment, is that they do provide a lot of things that the NFL could just cheat off of and bring to their game potentially with some of the rules that you've seen, the kickoff rule specifically being brought over to the NFL and trying to change that. Maybe the fans' atmosphere and the fans' love for some of these teams can make the NFL look at it a bit more seriously and think about maybe bringing an NFL franchise there and just changing the landscape of the teams, expanding upon the league number more so. All these conversations, I'm sure, won't happen this year, maybe won't happen next year, but they are something that I think is interesting to talk about. But with that being said, that will do it for me on today's episode. I want to thank you guys for tuning into today's show of the GSMC Chip Shot Football podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following us on all of our social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for the YouTube shorts that are posted every weekday. The full live recorded shows are all on there as well. And you have individual segment videos. If you don't have time to watch a whole episode, there are the individual segment videos on there for you just to watch a specific part of the show. As a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for newest episodes of the GSMC Chip Shot Football podcast with me, Manny Maradiega, as your host. Thanking you guys again for joining me on today's show, and I'll see you guys all back here again, same time tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't